Welcome to this explainer. You know, we live in a world right now that just feels relentlessly loud. Everywhere you look, everyone's got a brand, a rigid stance, some unyielding opinion. There's this constant, heavy pressure on all of us to be absolutely certain, to always be the one with the answer, and to never, ever get caught without a quick retort. But there's a pretty unsettling truth about human behavior that we usually overlook. So today we're going to explore exactly why saying 4 simple words, "I might be wrong," feels like a genuine physical threat in a society that demands we always have it figured out.
Let's just start quietly here for a second and reflect on a really profound psychological truth. We tend to assume that the person absolutely dominating the room with their rock-solid confidence is the most secure person there, right? Well, actually, scratch that. The reality is often the exact opposite. Extreme certainty is very often just a defense mechanism. Think about it. The louder someone is about what they know, the more likely it is they're using that certainty as a shield to protect themselves from the vulnerability of the unknown.
Okay, so let's dive into this and define our core concept, because true intellectual humility has honestly become one of the rarest assets a person can possibly possess. It's simply the quiet ability to say, hey, I might be wrong. But here's what makes it so fascinating. This isn't just some quirky personality trait you're either born with or you're not. It is a profound psychological achievement. Why? Because for a lot of us, admitting we don't know something doesn't just feel like making a simple mistake. It actually triggers our nervous system. It feels like a literal threat to our personal safety.
And that brilliantly highlights the societal trap we're stuck in. We've been completely conditioned to believe that competence is exactly synonymous with being right all the time. If you look closely at your own life, you might even notice a subtle, persistent fear of being found out. We treat a change of mind like it's a total defeat. And that creates this psychological trap where we prioritize the mere appearance of knowledge over the actual messy act of learning. We just navigate conversations waiting for our turn to speak rather than genuinely listening to understand.
The result? Well, we end up turning our intellect into what psychology might call a fortress of certainty. We build these incredibly thick, impenetrable walls around our opinions just to avoid looking weak or uninformed. But the problem with a fortress is that while it's great at keeping other people out, it also locks you inside your own limitations. It completely kills our curiosity. We get so obsessed with defending our little intellectual territory that we lose the very thing that helps us grow.
Now, to understand why we do this, we really have to look back. It's fascinating how psychology links our adult rigidity directly to our early environments. Imagine growing up somewhere where you just couldn't rely on consistent support. Maybe you were emotionally ignored, or you were never anyone's first choice. Your brain adapted. You learned to trust yourself first because, well, you literally had to. You learned to prioritize consistency and extreme self-sufficiency over vulnerability. Your brain figured out that being ignored happens quietly, and relying on others, that's a gamble you just couldn't afford to take.
For a lot of people, this leads to a phenomenon known as parentification. Basically, if you had to be responsible because no one else was stepping up, your accelerated maturity was built for survival, not for success. Your nervous system actually learned to associate calm with potential danger, because back then, when things were quiet, it usually meant something was about to go wrong. You developed emotional independence through sheer unreliability. So, to that child, who is now you, the adult, admitting you're wrong today feels like stepping right back into a vulnerability you spent your whole life escaping. It feels like a dangerous lapse in your vigilance. Let's look at a really interesting illustration of this defensive mechanism in action. Think of the lazy but ambitious paradox. We all know someone like this, right? They're deeply ambitious, they imagine this huge future, but from the outside they just appear completely stuck or unmotivated. But here's the secret. They aren't actually lazy. Internally, they are completely paralyzed by impossibly high standards and intense perfectionistic thinking.
So the crucial point here is that their motivation just works differently. They delay starting anything because waiting actually feels safer than starting imperfectly. Their mind rarely ever rests. They spend massive amounts of cognitive energy planning, predicting, and evaluating every little thing. By the time physical action is actually required, they're already suffering from deep mental fatigue. And guess what? This is the exact same mechanism that kills intellectual humility. Because if you can't bear the thought of an imperfect first draft, there is no way you can bear the thought of voicing an imperfect opinion.
Let's switch gears and look at another puzzling behavior to see how the brain protects us under pressure. Have you ever wondered why some people laugh during highly serious or emotional moments? From the outside, it looks totally inappropriate. It's super easy to judge someone doing this as being disrespectful or maybe just immature. But psychology tells us a radically different story. That laughter, it's actually an automatic defense mechanism. It activates the parasympathetic nervous system to quickly bring stress levels down. Think of it as a release valve for a brain that is completely overwhelmed by complexity and emotional tension. It interrupts those spiraling thoughts and gives a quick mental reboot. So it doesn't mean they lack empathy. In fact, it usually indicates a brain desperately trying to survive intense emotional pressure.
In the exact same way, some people cling to their opinions not out of malice and not out of sheer stubbornness, but because absolute certainty is their nervous system's way of regaining mental control in an unpredictable world. Certainty is their release valve. When the complexity of the truth feels like too much, declaring that they are absolutely 100% right is just a way of interrupting their own spiraling thoughts. They aren't actually fighting you. They're fighting their own internal sense of instability.
So how do we find our way back? How do we get back to humility? Well, it starts right here, with a really quiet realization. The next time you find yourself getting defensive or you feel that hot, familiar sting of being proven wrong, just take a deep breath. Recognize that your overwhelming need to be right is likely an adaptive response. It is not a character flaw. It's literally just your nervous system staying alert, trying its hardest to protect you from a danger that, honestly, passed a long time ago.
You have to realize that you don't have to be the one who solves problems all alone anymore. Intellectual humility is not about becoming weak. It's about realizing that you are finally, truly allowed to rest. You can stop viewing your mistakes as shameful. You can let go of the exhausting, heavy burden of having to have all the answers. And you can start choosing the quiet, enduring safety of the truth over the loud, chaotic excitement of just being right.
At the end of the day, intellectual humility is the absolute ultimate form of self-trust. It's this deep-seated belief that you are resilient enough to survive being wrong. Your value doesn't come from being perfect or irreplaceable, It comes from your ability to remain open. So, the next time you find yourself in a room full of loud voices, remember that the most powerful person there is the one comfortable enough in their own skin to simply say, I don't know, but I'm willing to learn. Because that is exactly where the noise finally stops. So I'll leave you with this to chew on. The next time you feel that desperate, burning urge to prove you're right, ask yourself, are you actually defending the truth, or are you just protecting your fortress?